Okay, welcome back everyone to the FPL Script. This is Season 3, Episode 8. We're in the FPL 24-25 season, and I'm your co-host FPL Fran, or FPL __Fran on Twitter, with my co-host here, JD, or Schadenfreude with a 1. We're looking at a quick recap of Game Week 3. I had 89 points again, this time without a triple captain chip. Didn't do anything too extravagant this week, I'd say. Just made the move to Rodgers, obviously, and was pretty comfortable doing that because it just gave me a little bit more in the bank. Other than that, João Pedro, very, very fortunate haul. Although it feels good to sort of be rewarded with the minutes in terms of the decision between him versus Armstrong. Isak, Eze, these were really just clear assets that did well. Bruno continues to blank, but I'm not too worried. Yes, of course, poor in the game that we expected him to be poor, and the same with United, right? With exception to some of the chances when they were 3 or 2 goals down. But yeah, that's that. Saka, consistent, and I think his misfortune was, in the end, my fortune with João Pedro, because I would have much rathered Brighton gotten something there, since that I've taken these bets against Arsenal defense. Otherwise, the one finals a reward from Lewis, which was just a mere assist from a really good Haaland shot. Hopefully a goal sometime in the distance, but him, Trent getting 6 points, and then Henderson outscoring Flecken for once, which I celebrated, even though it's not much. And then Konsa as well, who will await news on his sort of international break knock, but no, that was the team. What about you, JD?
Hello, everyone. So glad to be back after a break, and not as glad to be discussing Game Week 3 because it wasn't all that great. I suppose.
Green for you?
Yeah, it was. When you're 3 whatever million, 8-9 million, it's not difficult to get a green arrow. So again, Holland captain, fine. Honestly, I was thinking. I've already missed the chance for the best EV from a single game week. So I was just thinking, what if I triple captained him against West Ham as a joke? And actually, it would have worked out. But that kind of would have ruined my MD, because that would have made it so much worse, right? If I had to do it, I might as well have done it when he actually had the EV to back the triple captaincy. So anyway. Other than that, I'm not going to mention the players we shared, because we have a lot of players in common. But Robinson, again, fortuitous to say the least. But I suppose his luck is being balanced out by Muniz's rotten luck. Sure. Because he's, I think, the 6th most performing player when you compare XG against actual points. So I suppose there's that. And yeah, Rodgers, I didn't expect much, but again, unlucky to not get anything, I suppose. And Bruno, he better get something against Southampton, because if he doesn't, I would not be surprised to see one price drop on the day of the deadline and then another price drop in the midweek. So if he blanks again, it's going to be really bad for the team value, because I don't think I can transfer him out now. At least that's what I gather from all the solves that I've run on review, but we'll see. At least Isaac scored, so we could avoid that price drop for at least a little bit. But I already made my moves pretty early, so we'll discuss that later, I suppose. But yeah, we can move on.
That's fair. I guess news in terms of price drops, price rises. What I can see, just jumping in quickly, is
that's a good point.
Potential Kwanzaa drop. Maybe the Isaac drop will happen tonight. Potentially it's wildcards. He's sort of on the precipice of maybe not being a drop. Matoma, Robinson, Adama, these players pretty close to a rise. Same with Dunk as well. Someone who undoubtedly we'll just mention later on in the pod. Yeah. Okay, I think that's it. And then of course there's an Odegaard injury, so he's going to drop again. Yeah. Right, so sort of our recurring segment for this season is going to be looking at MD versus MD being sort of FPL reviews, sort of massive data, EV versus market odds. Once again, look, MD is what we all love here. So have a look at FPL review, but we're looking at just the differences, and I think we'll just try and identify the things that were new patterns compared to what we saw last week. So I think last week, if I just spot out what we identified quite early on, were definitely João Felix, Tillemans as well, most likely due to pen share. But I feel like what's new is maybe a bit of Semenyo, a bit of Salah as well. Should we just jump on to those two? Because these are really hot performers at the start of the season. And I thought it'd be interesting.
Yeah, with Semenyo, I mean, if you look at this list, especially the top half of the list, it does seem to be a little grassy, which is to be expected when you compare market odds, because they will try to capture as much of the, I forgot the technical term for it, but it's basically they're trying to capture the gap between EV. So they're trying to fill that EV gap as quickly as they can. So I'm sure I'll think of the word as soon as we end the podcast, which is what happens most times. But coming to the players that you mentioned, Semenyo and Salah in particular, Salah surprised me a little bit because he has always been reasonably favored by review, always. So maybe review has started accounting for a little bit of the age profile curve. I genuinely don't know, or maybe it's the other way around, that because we don't have a line in the sand, it could be that market odds is estimating him even more than what review is. So it could just be that market odds are even more favorable towards someone like Salah. But Rogers was the most interesting one, actually. If we want to switch our focus to a player that I feel a lot of players think review is already overestimating, and now we can see that market odds are even more favorable towards a player like him. So why do you think that has happened? Because I know you track these things pretty much. I want to say daily, but maybe not daily.
Yeah.
let's call it semi-regularly. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think part of it is just maybe confidence in his minutes turning into also confidence in what an Aston Villa attacker would provide. Maybe a bit more than review that could be a bit more sensitive to his historical data being a bit average, I guess. I think you never know. I guess it could be also a case of preempting when you have a player who has a lot of potential as well. And I think a lot of people see it on the pitch just watching him. But it's nice to have a third party source effectively confirm what many people would say is, someone who actually looks like he's got a lot of potential. I doubt it's anything like pen share. I think we saw Rogers here last week as well as one of the sort of red line assets. And by the way, anyone who's actually red or in the red zone here is effectively just more market odds favored. Someone who's blue is clearly a bit more review favored. And sometimes the difference is as simple as, review takes into account a lot of the other ways you can get points in FPL, which we know is true when we look at, people who are maybe very good at accumulating bonus for whatever reason. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But yeah, I think with him, it's definitely maybe just general confidence in Villa, I guess, maybe on the attacking end as well. I'm not quite sure. I've had a look at some team strength models and their sort of movements on Villa. I think they've been okay, positive, but nothing's been exceptional, right? They haven't taken their chances so far, but have performed well on underlyings. And we'll find out, obviously, over this run of games, like truly how they perform against Champions League as well, which I think is the big question mark a lot of people have. But with Rogers, you can see the EV's just looking really good. I think even on review, I can be honest and say that his EV's gone up a little higher as well. So I think that's a positive sign both ways. So I think anyone who's actually moved into Rogers, you should feel pretty comfortable about that pick. There are some picks here that maybe we can just skip over. But we can maybe just...
One thing, sorry, I just wanted to discuss one thing which is not a part of this, but something I noticed when I sent you the data, which was that Arsenal attack is more favored on market odds and Arsenal defense is more favored on the review.
Yeah.
Which is something, if anyone wants to look at it themselves, just you can move the slider for market odds and you'll see an immediate change, which was slightly interesting. As you mentioned already, the bonus point potential is included in that. But it just goes to show that review, I think, has certain underlying or baselines that it is trying to boost. For example, Spurs, right? You can see that Pedro Porro is top, and I think it has always been a bone of contention, even in analytics, that Pedro Porro's EV for a lot of managers has always seemed to be fugazi. But we can clearly see in every game that he plays that maybe that's not the case. Not just, of course, I'm not talking about the way he plays, but the data that he is registering game after game. So I feel fairly confident that review has a better grasp of a player like Pedro Porro over market odds. But when I look at something like Arsenal defense, I feel more aggravated by the fact that we've had to suffer 2 clean sheets back to back from Arsenal, given that market odds were not, review was more favored towards clean sheets compared to market odds. So maybe there's I need to reduce the weightage on market odds, because I've always been somewhat of a 80-20 review market odds player. So maybe I need to switch it up a little bit in order to get that little more bit of EV.
Yeah, and I think just to touch on in terms of like team ratings so far, there's obviously Simon, but Elevenify, he's shared already some of his model movements in terms of attack and defense rating. So definitely like Arsenal, bit of a drop off in general in attack, and a small drop off in defense so far, right? So I guess markets have also reacted to that in their own way. But I think that the players that I find that don't really unfortunately concern a lot of us would be a lot of the budget ones like Hudson-Odoi, Doucouré, Hwang, even Cunha, Smith Rowe. These are all pretty boring picks, but yeah, I think Semenyo is definitely one to pick out on, because of course in a few weeks' time, unless you're getting him now, on a wild card or something like that, he's definitely a pick to kind of look at, because yes, of course the underlying data so far is just absolutely ridiculous. He's not going to maintain that pace, but I guess it could truly be the case that his underlying numbers could fly up this season, given that he's a bit more of a key player to the team. And maybe we'll see how that sort of continues to track. And sometimes what happens as well is if players continue to sort of put out good numbers and put good performances, we might actually lose track of what's actually increasing week to week. We're just looking at the delta between the two. So I think what I've noticed with Semenyo myself is that his EV has already gone up a little bit, even on review. But then, as you can see, markets have reacted a little bit more strongly towards his performances so far. And Muniz, I feel like the confidence was always there on him. Underlying data looks good anyways for him. So as you mentioned, you've been really unlucky with him. And we saw Isak last week too on this list. Bruno Guimaraes, I reckon that's probably a little bit of bonus impacts as well. I've noticed that
I think that is primarily that, yeah.
I think he's already starting to lead the league again in fouls drawn, which is something he did last season. We've mentioned the sort of actually Sobo, I think is probably the one I'd probably point out to the most. I think he's actually one of the best assets in the game right now, if you have room for triple Liverpool, or have room for him to be your third Liverpool asset potentially. So yeah, he seemingly has perfect minutes. We know that because of the first 3 games of the season, but more now because of the Harvey Elliott injury. But you're looking at the positions he's taking up, the minutes he's playing. He's undoubtedly a little bit underpriced, I would say. So I think he's definitely a pick that I would identify as someone I'd love to transfer to if I could. And it's nice to see that his EV is really good in review. Gibbs White, this is a curious one because we don't have set piece shares, and I really don't know if it's just purely penalties that's driving the difference, or whether there's still sort of residual set piece share on him.
No, but if you look at, let's say, Soboslai has 1% penalty share on review. Gibbs White, I believe, and I think you also agree with me, that has a lot more penalty share than he deserves on the review. And I think the same is the case with McAllister and Solanke. McAllister, I saw had like
Fair.
12% penalty share in 6 weeks' time. So his penalty share goes up obviously because the decay is just like we saw with Odegaard and Saka. So McAllister, Solanke, Gibbs White, I can understand why they are more favorable on the review. It's just the primary factor has to be the pen share. But you're right. I think Gibbs White, there could be even more of a set piece taking share, just because we've seen that he's hardly on any except for direct free kicks, and he's good at them. But as you so. I was looking into this because I was modeling Champions League Fantasy, which is back next week, and was it 4% of direct free kicks are scored? Something ridiculously low. So I don't think you want to depend on him getting just direct free kicks for any additional returns, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. Okay, so we'll jump into just a very template default wildcard solve here with just default minutes as well in review. This is wildcard 4. I know a lot of people have planned for wildcard 4, mostly because it was a convenient way to go triple Arsenal at the start, maybe target some teams that had great fixtures like Nottingham Forest, and then hop off them here on a window where you can just jump on someone like Salah. And now I think obviously with our sentiments on where Haaland is, you can see we have a solve here with Haaland and Salah, and they're both looking very optimal, which is, I feel like, something that a lot of us within analytics probably wouldn't have expected. And maybe that's also because we have more confidence now in some of the edge picks. So like, I feel like Minte, João Pedro, Rodgers, maybe our confidence in some of the cheaper attacking assets has increased. But yeah, this is a pretty tight draft. This has Dunk, Konsa, Colwell, Robertson, Mosquera in defense, with Ederson and Muric as the goalkeeper. So that's a lot of money spent in goalkeepers, by the way. In the midfield, you have Salah, Bruno, Eze, Rodgers, Minte, and then in the front line, you have Haaland, João Pedro, Solanke. I think what's nice about this draft is it has the structure that I think a lot of people feel like they've missed the boat on in terms of Haaland and Salah.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Go for it.
Did you check the transfer plan for this? Is one of the transfers Robertson to an Arsenal defender in Gameweek 6?
I think so. So there's quite a bit of optionality because you do want to go into Mbeumo in the future. So I think it's generally actually just Saka from Salah and then Minte to Mbeumo.
I see.
As opposed to actually going from Robertson to Gabriel. But that's a really good point that you mentioned, because I feel like a lot of us have been planning to go out of our Liverpool defenders, but actually with Liverpool looking so good on defense, and I feel like a lot of team strengths, a lot of data sources sort of updating their understanding of Liverpool, I think, yeah, maybe we've turned the corner on wanting to make that sort of transfer. And part of it too, because is also, we mentioned Arsenal shifting the other way as well with some of their performances so far. One of them, of course, under the pressure of 10 versus 11. But yeah, I feel like maybe it's a case where in a few weeks' time, actually, you try and get Gabriel if you can. But on this draft here, you've clearly got 0 Arsenal, which some people might have an issue with. And I think it comes down to how you want to look at transfers. I think I had the default 2.11 sort of free transfer value here, but you might be a little bit more cautious with your wild card. Particularly if you don't have free transfers saved. And in that case, it might make sense to run a wildcard with a slightly higher FT value, and you might get another Arsenal player within this draft, like a Gabriel. And I don't know how that changes the team, but I've actually just sort of played around with future wildcards too, and I did find that Liverpool defense was staying on them a little bit more than I expected, and part of that might just be, because they're just performing really well. But it's a good question.
Yeah, sorry I interrupted your flow. If you want to complete any other part of the wildcard that you wanted to discuss before I can maybe talk about 1 or 2 picks that I find interesting.
Yeah, I think what I would say structurally is, once again, Bruno's here. I know a lot of people are sort of opposed to having Bruno in their teams, and that could just be if, let's say, you want to go to someone like Havertz or even have a spot for someone in that price point. You're kind of blocked from it here because Solanke is someone down from Havertz. So structurally, I think there's always some questions on that, and that could maybe get rid of the Mosquera spot for you as well. But there's quite a ways to go around it. Murik Ederson is probably also one that I don't love. I think Fleck and Verbruggen might actually stand out really strong as a goalkeeper pairing as well. Verbruggen is someone who we can talk about him in xMins Corner, but I don't think there's a need to. The reality is he is just someone that you should just be adjusting for, I would say, within review for his defaults, and he might actually show up in very competitive sols for you.
Yeah, that is the first thing I was going to mention, because I've seen Wildcard 3 with these exact same goalkeepers, and I just feel like, okay, fine. One of the arguments is that you no longer need to go for someone like Guardiola, right? Because he is no longer playing the same role like he was last season. So maybe the argument now is that just go for the safer pick in defense and have one City defender. So Ederson might be the one. But I just feel like if you want to go for a more robust wildcard, might be that Raya could be the play as well, because I've tried to run some wildcards for wildcard 6, and Raya does show up. So it's just a matter of 2 weeks' time. And if there are teams which do not have a single free transfer or one free transfer, because you'll get one the next week, so you could easily plan, like you said, for either a defender or for a goalkeeper. But I feel like Fleck and Verbruggen might be the best goalkeeping pair from what I've seen, just based on their fixtures and the fact that Steele is absolutely not in contention based on the last 2 games.
Yep. I think we lost JD there potentially, which just means we'll keep going. So in terms of xMins Corner, I think what we wanted to discuss on quickly was Rico Lewis, and that side of things. You're back now. I've shifted quickly towards xMins Corner.
No, it's fine. I was just going to say that Verbruggen is definitely first choice now, because he started the Carabao Cup game and then the immediate Premier League game. So there's no concern there.
Yeah. But yeah, generally speaking, I would say if we look at xMins Corner, I think the only hot topic in terms of minutes right now is just Man City, and once again Rico Lewis. I mean, having the privilege to speak to someone like Luke, and I'm sure he'll iterate on it within his, or he probably would have already iterated within his own podcast, is just generally about how we'll see City set up versus a team like Arsenal, and that giving us an indication of what the plan is for the rest of the season. I have to say that I don't really agree with people thinking that Pep has cooked up a tactic that has worked really, 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 really well, might I add, for the first 3 games of the season, just so that he can avoid, the absence of Rodri. The reality is City has performed exceptionally, and I feel like teams have really struggled. Whereas if we would, let's say, talk about how City played in the previous season, there was a strong dependence on Rodri, and the Rodri-less performances were genuinely horrific. And I can't see... I think one of the issues, of course, is what happens to someone like Kovacic, who's played really when Rodri's back, because yes, of course, he's back. And then Foden's in training, but I don't think we'll see him start this weekend. I feel like that would be a huge push. So my thoughts are still that Rico Lewis can very much so play. And I think if anyone wanted to sort of put the assertion that, let's say, a very physical team like West Ham would have made Walker start, I think you have to use the same logic the other way around and probably assume that, given that City are playing so well, Rico starts again. But I take the point that Luke makes, where once again Arsenal is that test, and you might want to reconsider after that game, because you're very unlikely going to play Rico versus Arsenal, and you'll have the luxury of being able to make that decision after that and after Champions League as well.
So see, this is where I'm struggling, because City has so many games coming up right now that, and of course, like you mentioned, people talking about different style of opposition that they're going to play. For example, Brentford, Internacional, and then Arsenal, the next 3. So there are 2 schools of thought, right? Obviously, the first school of thought is Rico Lewis is firmly one of the he's going to occupy one of the starting fullback roles. and the other one is Pep will change the system completely based on who is coming back. So if Rodri comes back, then Walker can come back in, and so on and so forth. One thing is, Ake got injured against Germany yesterday, right, or the day before?
I think it was yesterday. Yeah.
Yesterday, yeah. I apologize, but time has been going weirdly for me lately. So because of all the prep, but if Ake is out, that's one less player he needs to compete with. And I don't know, it just feels like there's some concept of inertia when it comes to Pep selection, that if things are going well, he just sticks to it for a certain time. Of course, the biggest challenge is defining that certain period of time is the problem. We don't know when that time period is going to end.
Yeah.
And I feel like I think Luke also spoke about John Stones is the one that people need to be more concerned about. People who want to go for Rico Lewis, because he is the one who is going to come into midfield in place of Rico Lewis. So Stones seems to be fit, and he's played for England as well. So maybe there's some doubt there. But like Fran said, if you just want to wait now, seems like a good time to wait for 3 games. And these 3 games might give us a much better understanding. I'm sure something else will crop up by the end of those 3 games where we still have some doubt. But I feel like that is a good litmus test to see if Rico Lewis is indeed nailed. But if you're an owner, I genuinely don't think there is anything to worry about, because unless you have a terrible bench, because a lot of us have Konza, I know, and Konza is also one of the players. I'm just going to mention him now because we are in xMins corner anyway. So Konza rolled his ankle and was subbed off on the 61st minute yesterday. So we don't know his situation, and let's wait for Unai Emery to say something. But if he doesn't, the review hasn't accounted for any absence, but I'm sure he will later down the line, because his EV right now is one of the top, I think 5 defenders at his price point. So I'm just going to wait and watch for that. But other than that, Pau Torres could be the one, based on what we have, the information that we have right now. So if you're on the wild card and you just want to go for the safer pick, just go for Pau Torres, I think. Luka Dean might be, he's playing every game, I know, but there could be a game where he's just rested and Maatsen plays. Because as Fran mentioned this 2 weeks ago, I think that Maatsen is not there just to sit on the bench, right? So there could be easily a game where he's played. Now, it could easily be Young Boys is the game where he plays in the Champions League, and he's rested against Everton. So look out for that. But other than that, do you have any other 4.5 defenders that we can talk about?
Yeah, I think Van Heck's the one that we talked about before the show started. Interestingly, Dunk is one of the players who a lot of his EV is probably tied to, I guess, how much of an aerial threat he is, but then also that he is also a potential set piece taker. We did mention that he could be maybe on direct free kicks, as he has been in the past. I know Elevenify definitely schooled that into me, but I think what's curious with a team like Brighton is, it's very clear that they have a lot of shared set piece takers now, and I do think that the foot of the player is actually quite relevant to that as well. But there's that. Only thing is, as you mentioned, Pau has so much more of a cleaner run of games. I think he's much more playable. Generally speaking, I'd prefer him to Van Heck. And there's, I think, very few situations where you generally believe that Dunk isn't nailed. I know Webster is there. I wouldn't necessarily put him in the Maatsen camp of he's not there to, just sit on the bench. I feel like Webster very well could be a player like that, unless Dunk, continues to make a lot of large errors. But I don't think managers are that reactive to situations like that, like his mistake in the Arsenal game.
Webster has a catalog of these errors already. So if you look at all the games that Webster has played in the past couple of seasons, I don't remember a game where Brighton hasn't conceded a couple of goals when Webster has played. Now, again, slightly anecdotal evidence, but I'm pretty sure I can back that up with actual data as well, because it's just a grim watch whenever he's playing. So I don't doubt that the nailed partnership is Van Heck and Dunk. But as a Dunk owner, I would if you want to be that much more secure, just go for a Van Heck. Assuming that you want to go for 4.5 million defenders, but if you just want to go for one, I think Pau Torres has to be the one.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah,
I guess
we'll go through any other players that any other teams that we wanted to talk about. One interesting thing is Harvey Elliott is injured for 5 weeks, right? From what I read.
Yeah, 5 to 8, something like that.
5 to 8. So based, is it a broken ankle?
Didn't actually check the diagnosis.
Yeah, I think it was a broken ankle. So based on that injury news, it just seems that the midfield is almost nailed now, because the one thing that we were worrying about was potentially Szoboszlai maybe getting subbed early for someone like Elliott. So just to add to your point about Szoboszlai being a good asset, is that his minutes or the minutes of the entire midfield might be even more secure now, as in Gravenberch, McAllister, and Szoboszlai. Just something to point out. I'm sure no one wanted to buy Harvey Elliott, but his absence does impact other players' xMins.
Yeah, I guess maybe if we are in Liverpool anyways, I mean, where do you stand on Konate? And then also, what do you think about minutes progression in terms of Diaz and Jota for now?
Okay, so help me out with this. I because I haven't checked this myself yet, but I'm pretty sure if you are, is Gerald Kwanzaa a part of the under 21 consideration where you don't need to register him in order to play him in the Champions League, or is that only for the Premier League?
Testing my football manager knowledge here.
No, yeah, that's the only reason I asked you.
I think so, because he's still 21.
Yeah.
And
so
he's a
the reason
homegrown
I
player.
asked is, yeah, I'm sure Liverpool have not included him in the squad, and that's why UCL Fantasy has gone ahead and deleted him from the game.
Oh,
which is an extremely unwise move, because obviously he's going to be a part of the squad. So, and as a result, someone like Harvey Elliott has also been removed from the game.
Yes,
which makes no sense to me. So it has to be that these players have not been included in the official squad list, but they are of course there.
Yep.
So I just wanted to confirm that, because if he was not going to play Champions League, then I was going to suggest that maybe there's some copium for Kwanzaa owners after all. But if he is going to take part in Champions League, then I don't think anything's going to change. I still think Konate is first choice. And if you have Kwanzaa till now, you said he might drop in price again, right?
Yeah.
So if you are not on a wild card, then I don't know how much longer you can hold on to him. But if you're on a wild card, wait for him to get to 4.2, and maybe you can buy him, because the downside is almost nullified, right? At that point, it's very difficult that he'll go from 4.2 to 4.1 now. So this is critique inspired by that. This is not me. This is Angie Ball on Twitter. He has been waiting for that Kwanzaa price drop for 2 weeks now.
Okay, but you wouldn't touch Konate then?
No, I wouldn't. See, it's really weird. Now you mentioned that, because on the face of it, there is no third option now, because Vandenberg has left.
Yeah.
So I don't see how they're going to change up the system so that neither Konate nor Kwanzaa play. But I don't know. It's just because one is clearly not favored right now, and the other one is always injury prone. So I don't know how to mentally assign weightage to those players. So maybe I would go for Kwanzaa at 4.2. Like I said, I don't see any more downside to that. But Konate, I definitely don't want to go for someone like him. Do you think differently?
I mean, I definitely wouldn't go Kwanzaa at 4.2 just because it blocks Liverpool as well.
Yeah, it was kind of tongue in cheek, but I did forget that blocks Liverpool spot. So fair enough.
Okay, but in terms of Jota Diaz, I think from my very grassy eye test, I have to say that it does look like Darwin's a bit clueless right now for Liverpool. I'm sure he'll continue to play the minutes that he's playing, which is like the bare minimum, really, for a player of his caliber. So like 20-25 minutes a game. I'm quite high on Jota's minutes, I would say, from that perspective. But one of the issues is even if you do think Jota will start permanently and he's a 75-minute substitute, his EV is not
75
great.
to 70.
And I think a lot of
Yep.
people have sort of overestimated how well Liverpool have performed so far by sort of conflating how good they've looked on defense versus attack compared to our priors. So yeah, like I don't think, for example, like, okay, maybe Diaz, underlying numbers so far have been good. You can argue maybe change in terms of the role of the striker in the system is a bit different, but generally speaking, I have to say I'm not that infused by either. And Diaz more specifically because of the sort of the load that he's sort of played with over the last 2 games in the World Cup qualifiers in South America, and that meaning it's a good chance, I'd say, for Gakpo to get more minutes as well in Gameweek 4 or 5, depending on Champions League 2. So yeah, I'm pretty cold on Luis Diaz and Jota. I know a lot of people really want to jump onto these picks, but I think they'll continue to probably starting most games, but it doesn't really mean much for me, unfortunately, if they're going to continue to be 70, 75-minute subs. Happy to be wrong, though, and happy for Liverpool to continue doing well and Bruno to continue blanking, but that's me.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable assumption right now, and we can probably wait. I suppose for wildcarders, they cannot wait. But for anyone else who wants to just monitor the situation, I suppose the next 2 weeks could give us
As
a
I
much
said,
better
I would
idea.
just jump on Sobo, though, because I just think he's such a crazy good pick right now. But that would be like what I would be doing.
Yeah, you said that to me, but I still, for some reason, because he doesn't have monopoly on anything.
He has some set
Just
pieces.
because. No, I'm saying Trent exists, so it's not a monopoly, right? It's a shared.
Yeah, but he's still an
It's a shared
attacker,
duty.
right?
Yeah. I just don't know. I'm not as confident as you are, which is fair enough. It's not like a huge gap in our understanding, but I just feel like you could go for a double Liverpool defense and Salah before Soboslai. But I think you're talking about the price point as well, which Soboslai does fulfill in a sense because Nkunku is no longer an option. So if people want to stick to that sort of team structure, then maybe Soboslai is the answer as opposed to double defense, because that does involve putting in a lot of money into your defense. So maybe that is the case, but I'm not too inspired by Soboslai as a pick. He has the EV, so I suppose there's that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that people just need to do is just have a look at his EV, like with 90 really put in, because I just can't see how he's not a 90-minute player. And actually, like when you look at that, he kind of has the sort of XPPM of someone like right now higher than Bruno, under Eze, under Mbumo, but that's it. Or under Rodgers as well. But generally, he's a very cost efficient midfielder now. And if you don't have the confidence in Bruno, then he's one of the picks that I'd happily own for, a few weeks, up until maybe even game week 7, right? So that was just my thought, potentially, particularly for those people who don't like a Bruno at this point in time and might want to spend. Because if you, let's say, look at the wild card we were just discussing, it's very conceivable that you could go Sobo over Bruno, and then you will get the enough money to actually get your 6 or double 6 defenders, and maybe you can actually just go the one keeper as well, or the rotation pair that we suggested, which is like Fleck and Verbruggen. Like, there's a lot of ways to sort of eke out cash or to kind of, move it around to get an even more well-balanced team, particularly if you want to disregard some of the picks in the game. So I feel like he's definitely one that is a bit slept on in terms of how strong he is. Other than that, though, I guess one interesting discussion that always rears its head around is Matoma and his EV. I've probably learnt my lesson, I think, not to overreact too much, but I noticed that his EV is actually worse than Minte's, just flat out. Any thoughts on that?
So I don't know if you've seen the uptick that you were expecting with Minte, because I know you've been talking about how review has potentially not yet assigned as much set piece weightage to Minte as review should. So have things
Maybe.
changed on that front?
I think, yeah, I mean, Minte's EV looks amazing, to be quite
Yeah,
honest.
exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to put it in a reference frame where Minte's EV is class and Mitoma is just Mitoma. So Mitoma is where he is, and Minte is just one step further, I would say,
Yeah.
in terms of an FPL asset. Just because of the number of set pieces I've seen him on, and his underlying stats from Eredivisie are just astronomical. So based on the first couple of game weeks and the minutes that he's been getting, I am very much encouraged by getting him over someone like Mitoma. And surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, but we do need to worry about which Brighton players we buy, because I can easily see tripling up for a long stretch of the season with a defender, someone like Kadioglu or Dunk. We haven't spoken about Kadioglu, by the way, and
True.
I
Or
don't know
Estupiñán,
what.
yeah.
Yeah, I understand opinion. So I don't know where Kadioglu stands in terms of his integration with Brighton within the Brighton team, but uh, once we know that he starts, I would say that he's the best 4.5 million option.
Interesting. Okay. I think, yeah, one of the issues with that, of course, is that you need this Brighton player to play versus Ipswich at home.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you're not going to get that comfort level, even though Kadioglu is in training. So, yeah, I think that's the unfortunate part of it. But it's also very possible that, you know, by, let's say, game week 9, we might have a lot of confidence in a team like Brighton when they have another good fixture there. Or just, I think the next swing for that is like game week 13. So it's like, okay, you'll have enough games to kind of reassess how you want to go about Brighton later down the line. And if they continue to sort of play like a top 6 team, then I think there's like plenty of picks that we'll continue to find really interesting. We'll just need to monitor the minutes of like all the players. When players like March will come back into the team, and Evan Ferguson, and what the impacts are exactly to the attackers too. That will be very curious. But for now, yeah, I think we have like one clear game breaker in João Pedro. And then there's like 2 other picks that you can really just go across the board with Brighton on. And I don't think there's any sort of glaring mistakes that you can make other than maybe going for Estupiñán. Like, I'm not sold on going for someone who's 5.0 who might not start every game. But that's just the thought I have for now.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we've covered all the teams that we wanted to talk about. So we can probably move on to the next segment.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we could just round up quickly on captaincy. This is a pretty simple standard week, in my opinion. I think it's Haaland by a bit, Salah close behind, and everyone else is far away from Salah, and Haaland and Eze's next up with Leicester at home. So if I owned the 2 assets, I think I'd definitely go with Haaland still. But I have to be honest, like Salah looks incredible in terms of his EV right now.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a toss up if you own both of them.
Yeah.
But if you own just the one, then you'll captain whoever you own. And I don't see the need, especially this week, to buy the other asset by going out of your way. If it's like you have a lot of free transfers like I do, then I've done something where I bought Salah. But if you don't need to, then you can just captain Haaland and postpone that decision for next week. Because you know that if we go into, let's say, game week 6 and further, you'll need more Arsenal assets, and then the need for Salah dwindles automatically. So it's just a question of, are you patient enough, or I don't know, is patience the right word, or maybe you don't want to be dead lost after 6 weeks? I don't know. What would you call it?
Yeah, I think patience, one way about it. I mean, you talk some transfers. Why don't we just jump into that, since captaincy does feel a bit dull this week. So this was your team last week.
Yes.
What were your transfers?
Like I mentioned before, and this will definitely show up in the review metric, which measures how early you've done your transfers. I did 0 transfers for 3 weeks, and now I've done 2 free transfers. So the 2 free transfers are Isaac and Saka to João Pedro and Salah.
Great move.
And Yeah, I mean, there were two paths which were fairly close, and I posted about those two paths. The other one was going Muniz to João Pedro. So João Pedro was always in as a part of the plan. I felt like that plan got a little scuppered when he was called up last minute to play for Brazil. But seems like he's come back unscathed and hopefully should start. So good news on that front. But if I look at the first plan, which I did not end up doing, which was Muniz to João Pedro, the transfers down the line were to roll again in Game Week 5 and then use all 4 free transfers and essentially cycle all. Was it? I had to get rid of a bunch of players and 4 players to be exact, and bring in Gabriel Havertz as part of the transfers. Because then I would have triple Arsenal in Game Week 6 against Leicester. And Saka obviously is the best captaincy choice in that game week, so that would also resolve that. But now that I've gotten rid of Saka, one of my transfers in Game Week 6 has to be to bring him back. So I suppose I'm taking a bit of a risk there because this path is not as robust as the other one. But I just had to do it because what was the point of rolling for 3 weeks if I can't do something which not a lot of people not on wildcard can, right? So maybe that was the opportunity cost I looked at.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one because I feel like with Salah's EV looking as good as it is now, is there an argument to say that switching back to Saka in Game Week 6 is that necessary for most managers to do?
No. So, you asked me a question which I'm going to answer, but just to clarify my plan, it's not to go from Salah to Saka.
Okay.
I'm probably going to do Bruno Fernandes to Saka.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah. So the review optimal path for me was Salah to Saka till 5 days ago. But a couple of days ago, I ran a solve and it's no longer there. So it's clearly because Salah's EV went up.
Yeah.
And Saka's EV maybe has gone up now because I haven't run a solve since Odegaard got injured. And now if the penalty share has gone up, maybe that is going to change things now.
I've seen the pen share go up, but I've also seen the actual EV go slightly the other way. I think maybe because Odegaard's quite important. Who knows?
Oh yes. And Rice is also absent, and there's going to be absolutely
But even in terms of Game Week 6 and 7, I think there's now some sort of knock-on impacts, right? Because of course, I think if you own Saka, you could just very well go Haaland captain Game Week 7. If in terms of Game Week 6, you're willing to take the small expected value loss of not having Saka as a captaincy, I think it's not looking as bad right now with Salah's EB as good as it is. But it also depends on, once again, if you're using market odds, if you're using review, massive data. But even on MD, I've noticed a huge tick up of Salah's Game Week 5 EV in particular, which, now sort of removes the, I guess, how flexible I could have been in the past, thinking that I could have just gone Son as a way to skirt around Salah. Now it feels like my plans comfortably revolve around him. Interestingly,
let's discuss your plans as well. What do you plan on doing in the next couple of weeks?
With my team, I did mention that I was sort of thinking of ways around Game Week 6 wildcard, only because I'm very happy with my team. And I think the sort of solution around it is if I wildcard 7, mostly because I think I'll definitely be making a move towards Salah now. And I think if you make a move towards Salah and you, let's say, already own someone like Trent, then, I'm more invested in Liverpool than I am in Arsenal. And it makes more sense to wildcard on 7, where Liverpool have already played their good fixture in Game Week 6. And then I can kind of, it's not a good fixture, right? But it's certainly not like, let's say, Game Week 7, which is like Crystal Palace away. Still a pretty good fixture, by the way. But Wolves away is kind of hard to pass up on a game like that with Salah. And I imagine some people would have dropped Salah on Game Week 6 wildcard. So I guess in this circumstance, I would once again skirt the two poor Haaland games, sell Haaland on Game Week 5 for Havertz, which is a really bad game for Havertz, but knowing that I have Havertz for basically 5 and 6.
Yeah.
And what am I talking about here? So no, I'd have Havertz for 6, Salah for 6, and Trent for 6, which is really good for my team. Who knows if Rico can play around then, but I've already sort of run him with poor minutes, and it sounds a little bit more fun than just the dead end route with my team, which is on Game Week 6 wildcard to go out of Saka and Haaland into Salah plus Watkins. And maybe my mind will change because Watkins will look alive around that point in time. But given lack of faith, I suppose, from Watkins and Solanke, it's not too bad the idea of just going for a wildcard 7, because I think it also is a Haaland wildcard, right? So I would pick him back up conveniently when the fixture is good, as opposed to, I think, a Game Week 6 wildcard, which feels a little bit... I feel like if you're someone who's driven to the point where you would like to ride the season out with Haaland for most weeks, Game Week 6 wildcard is not for you, I would say. I don't really see it as a Haaland wildcard, personally. And I think it's more of a no one.
I don't know if you ran the chip strategy, the chip timing tool. So I did that, and surprisingly, I am also getting Game Week 7 as a very strong choice, which was, when I think about it, it's probably a bad week because it's right before the international break. So
true.
It's maybe you could probably hold off from that point of view, but I also looked at the fixtures, and there are some key fixture swings for a lot of players in my team, because the team that I was looking at pre-wildcard in Game Week 7 is actually horrendous. I don't want to play half my team in that week, and it's genuinely horrible. So if I want to go down this path of owning both Salah and Haaland, I think the only solution is to wildcard in 7. I just don't see any way around it. The other solution is, like you mentioned, which is go back to Saka from Salah.
Yeah,
that's the only way I can skirt not wildcarding in 7.
Sorry, I forgot to mention one thing too, by the way.
Yeah,
I can keep Saka whilst wildcarding on 7. So I can go Winks to Salah and Haaland to Havertz right now, based on current prices. Crazy. Which is a crazy move. So that means that on Game Week 6, I have like some sort of super team, which is like Saka plus Salah. So it feels quite good. And I can still maximize the captaincy for 6. Yeah. And then I go back to my Game Week 1 sort of looking team, which is Haaland plus Saka, I guess, or something like that. Nice. But we'll figure things out. So that I thought was a super cute line that I really want to go on. Because it's kind of like perfect navigation of all the picks I really still want to have, and I'm not that fussed about missing out on Arsenal defense, which will probably be like the weakest part of my team, right? A lot of people are, I think, but people are facing the same situation where they're double stacked on Arsenal defense, but probably actually want maybe a bit more of Arsenal attack, and that kind of goes back to what you were saying with in terms of market odds, and I think that's kind of how we perceived Arsenal so far, right? A team maybe where we'd rather potentially back the offense, but it's I would say they've looked pretty blunt so far as well. It's just the case that Liverpool look good as well.
One thing based on what you just said was, because review is more favorable towards the defense, it is always trying to push me towards an Arsenal defender. The only way I can get around that is by forcing Havertz in for Game Week 6. Because it still prefers buying Saka back and Gabriel back. So in the original plan, Saka is never sold, so Saka remains, and then the other two transfers are, one is Gabriel and one is Havertz. But now that Odegaard is out, I don't have the option anymore. But there was also an option where Odegaard was part of the team, right? Which is why a lot of people were getting wildcard 6 to begin with. And now that he's no longer a part, I think
that's a great shout. Didn't think about that way, because I think a lot of people would have probably even considered the idea of just like Bruno to Odegaard, that kind of thing. You know,
exactly.
But it is interesting how things have shifted, where it seems like there's a preference for Havertz as well, even in review, right? Like he's one of the more price efficient forwards, but that's also with really, really good minutes. And I think there's a couple players that we probably want to just going back to xMins corner. Like I think in the forward position, there's still a bit of doubt over like players like Watkins, players like Solanke, players like Calvert-Lewin in terms of like how quickly they're going to get to good minutes and for different reasons, right? Like Watkins, how much of a threat Durant is over the course of the season. Calvert-Lewin, is he actually going to be an 85, 90-minute player? Feels doubtful. And then obviously with Solanke, like, does he just jump straight back into what we saw in a one game sample was 90 minutes, where I feel like the game state predicated that he was going to play 90 minutes.
Yep.
So those are all sort of interesting developments I think will follow. And Jackson too, I suppose. Because I was a bit low on Jackson's minutes, but then he did play 19 gaming 3, and suddenly those kind of things are good questions, because right now you're seeing Chelsea, I think there's a clear lack of respect for what they plan to play within the Conference League. So I feel like it's very plausible we can go back into the zone where players like Palmer and Jackson could be playing close to 90 minutes a game each.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting development. But right now the forwards are pretty dull, I feel, and we just need more information, which is why delaying the wild card I think is helpful. But at the same time, it's also a good reason for people who wildcard this week to maybe just spend as much money as possible within the midfield, which always works well in FPL. So, yeah, a couple interesting points there. Shall we jump into some chat questions for the Q&A section?
Yep, absolutely.
All right, I'll just quickly navigate chat. Hey Mo, hope you're doing well. Same with you, Michael. Omri said start Poro or Konsa. I think I'd definitely start Konsa, because I feel like Konsa is going to be a 9 tier 0, right? So. People are sleeping on Bowen Kudus. It's a good point, Charlie, actually, because I think maybe less so on Kudus, because I'm not sure if his minutes are perfect. He obviously looked like the most menacing player in the City game, and I feel like one of the issues is going to be who's actually going to lose out in minutes, generally speaking. Is it really Kudus, which is the expectation, versus Somerville, or is he going to continue to play really well and probably keep his minutes? I would say that Bowen and West Ham, generally speaking, have a good run of games. It probably just means that if you, let's say, have zero faith in someone like a Bruno, have less faith in some of the forwards that we mentioned, that you're totally free to spend the money on the midfielders that you've identified. And if you're high on Kudus's minutes, then he's a great pick. Patriots 535 says thoughts on going with Trent plus 4.5 goalkeeper or Robertson and 5.5. It's weird because I feel like my favorite pair is Fleck and Verbruggen right now, which is 5.0, which means that you can go Robertson plus maybe do something else. I really would take Robertson plus the money, or the 5.5 goalkeeper, whichever way you go about it. Even though, generally speaking, I would say my experience in FPL is I do like a 4.5 goalkeeper, and I do like spending money in the outfield. I'm maybe a little bit against the crowd of sentiment that thinks that Trent is essential. I own Trent in my own team, but I think if I was wildcarding, I probably would consider just going Robbo. That's just my thoughts.
Yeah, completely agree with that.
Garnacho's question was, would you rather take, not actually Garnacho, but Garna, would you rather take Saka and Isak out for Salah and a forward, so kind of what you've done, or take out Gabriel and Saka for Salah and a defender? Maybe I'll let you answer that, since you might have dealt with a similar situation.
I did not own Gabriel, but if I did, then definitely I would do that, because their next two fixtures are where you definitely don't want to play him, and I don't see a price rise unless he hauls like he did against Palace last season, and I really hope that does not happen. So I'm pretty sure I would do the defense plus Saka move.
That's fair. Another question was Trent and Wisa or Lewis and Isak. I'd probably go Trent and Wisa, since this person's also mentioned that they can bench Wisa. The reason why I like that is you're unlikely to keep Isak anyways, I feel like, on a team going forwards, whereas Wisa, I think his minutes are actually really good, and he can be a staple pick on your team for a long time. Maybe the question to ask yourself is whether you do want to leave that money for the forward, just in the case that you might want a Solanke, a Havertz within your team. Like, I guess it's a structural question anyways, because there's no need really to ever go for, I think, deep forwards. Like, the reality with forwards is, like, if you look at someone like Havertz, look at his like XPPM. On 90 minutes, he like struggles to compete with some of the top midfielders in the game. So there's no real need to sort of stretch your team towards having that forward slot down. And if anything, the best forward in the game is a budget forward right now. Maybe it's Haaland, and I'm talking out of my mind, because that could actually be generally the answer.
Yeah,
but yeah,
fair enough.
I think those two forwards, João Pedro and Haaland, are really the essential ones. If you want to have them, anyways, because Haaland, I think you can always answer the Haaland question with a well-rounded team, which we've seen already. A lot of people have. But yeah, up to you on that. I'd probably go Trent Wisa. What would you go with?
Yeah, I think Visa is a really good pick. The only concern I always have, if you want to make robust moves, is you don't want to play him in for 2 weeks, so injuries or anything else can happen. But then I think of any other team that you would build, for example, on a wild card, and you do take risks on that as well, right? So
Fair.
It's not that different from buying a budget player and keeping him on the bench. I just feel like when you buy a player instead of putting him on a wild card, it just has more of a risk because you essentially waste the free transfer,
That's
which
true.
is quite rare as it is. So maybe slight risk, but absolutely he's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Dream Brother says Saka plus Jota to Salah plus Minte. Yeah, I think I'd easily make those moves.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. The next 2 weeks for Salah are just way too good to pass up on, really, and that's it.
Which begs the question: why didn't we go for him from week 1? Because no, I'm being really honest.
Yeah.
When I did the Salah move, there's this part of my ego which really did not want to do it, because I'm admitting defeat. That when you look back at it from hindsight perspective, definitely that seemed to be the right move. But I think you've already covered that pretty well, where the confidence with fringe picks was really not there. So now that we do have confidence in them, yeah,
that's a good point,
sense.
actually, because it's not only that, but it's also the confidence in picks that actually costs a fair sum of money, right? Like a lot of people did think at one point in time, of course, that Nkunku was, essential. Not essential, but just like someone that you really want to have. Same with Isak, same with Bruno. Like these players at those price points sort of necessitated that you go Haaland or Salah only. And I think that the main thing is, Haaland and Salah performed really well. And it's very clearly models and markets have moved in that same direction of sort of appreciating that. So in that sense, we've lost out in terms of what's hindsight optimal. But yeah, there's a lot of game week still to go, and it's like I feel like if you don't own, like, I mean, like they're capable of blanking, and they will blank, and like I don't own Salah for this week.
Horrible.
I'm worried about it,
horrible.
but
when he inevitably
he's
blanks.
not blanking, probably. It just seems too easy, or maybe it's just because he was playing versus United last week, but I don't know.
I actually don't have a leg to stand on. Yeah, yes, he just plays well
kidding.
against us.
I think.
Sorry, I derailed this. We can get back to.
No, that's fine. Mo confirming that Elliot had a fractured foot. Captain Ahmed says, "Hello guys, new fan from Egypt. What is your opinion about Joe Jota captain? I wouldn't captain him personally. I mean, I have to think you've got Salah or Haaland, and I would really slam the captaincy quite comfortably on those two picks. If you want to go Jota, you can go for it, but I think I wouldn't be comfortable saying he's like a top 3 captaincy pick or even a top 4 or 5. Zubi, I think, I mean, there was a sort of conversation around Isak, and I think they kind of reached a similar conclusion about how Isak eventually is a sell. So that's also priced into your wild card, which is not actually a good thing. As far as I think Connor, hello. Dreamber had a question. EV wise,
so just answer, a lot of people are asking you, are you wildcarding this week? So just tell them if you are.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to put this person in timeout, but I'm not wildcarding this week. Just try not to spam it in chat. A couple of people talk about wildcards, I think, just in tandem with what we're saying. Angel says he's considering selling Isak to 4.5 to do Bergwald as a 5th mid. and then that gives him Smith Rowe to Mbumo in Gameweek 6. I think those are great moves. Because, yeah, generally speaking, I think I would try to aim my team in the direction of having Mbumo and Eze, as opposed to, like, you know, spending too much money in the forward. So, yeah, if you have to do that, I think that's fine. And, yeah, I think another question, though, is... Yeah, I guess the question about double Arsenal, I think we did touch on that as well during the segment. So one last question, which was like Isak versus Saka. It's interesting because I think Isak is, for whatever reason, I feel like he still has really aggressive decay on review. I don't know why. He very clearly, to me, is a 90-minute player. I'm sure there's some of the sort of injury lag being a thing. But yeah, I feel like Isak is a pick that, honestly, you can hold conceivably until forever, because he's just that good. When you actually run him with the correct minutes, I feel like he's someone who can stay in your team. But it goes back to the point of, is he still better than a Mbumo or an Eze? And I don't think he is. And then actually going back to the point about Saka, Saka's at a price point where you constantly have to be moving some of these players around for captaincy. And depending on what your thoughts and feelings are on, let's say, owning Haaland and Salah. So let's say you own Haaland and you feel like you don't want to get him out of your team. Like, that's going to force opinions in some way about someone like Saka too. So yeah, I feel like I'm not saying that I'm going to play Haaland only this entire season, but generally I feel like I'm a bit more comfortable with Haaland in my team than not. And I'd like to build my team around him, generally speaking. So I think Saka is someone who falls still prey to what your team structure is around Haaland and Salah, unfortunately. And that's sort of my answer. Whereas Isak is someone you can keep, but can still be sold if you just want to go for the Mbumos and Ezes of the world and have budget forwards.
Thing about Saka, which I don't know if that's going to change this season, because Reece Nelson clearly wasn't a trusted deputy for someone like Saka. But with Sterling now in the team, I wonder if that's going to change. And if it changes, will it be in the Champions League or will it be in the Premier League games? Because Sterling definitely can cover the right wing much better than any other player they've had for a long time. So could just be that he actually gets a little bit of rest. I mean, we know that Arteta has flogged almost all of his players till date. So we only have precedents in defense where he keeps rotating players all the time. But as far as attack goes, I don't see a lot of history behind it, because the thing is, we would have had it with people like Lacazette and Aubameyang, but because their situations within the club were always in flux, I feel like we don't really have a good comparison to make. And maybe we just have to gamble on if people think Sterling is going to actually take minutes from Saka, or is he going to go on the left? I don't know. He can play anywhere, right? So I think it's just a question that will be answered by time, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you contrast that with someone like Palmer, who just was excluded from a European squad.
Yeah.
Like, how good that is, and how I guess we react to him versus someone like Saka as well. Like,
yeah,
that's an interesting point.
But I think, I don't know if I said this on the pod or before, but
yeah,
they are going to play all 8 games with their A team.
Yeah,
because Arsenal don't have the best fixtures as it is. So I don't think they can afford to drop points, given that top 8 teams qualify directly. If I remember correctly, I need to make sure.
Yeah, you have 8 teams that get automatically seeded into the round of 16.
16 teams are in the playoffs. Yeah,
yes, yeah, okay, exactly. Yeah. And then the next 16 teams, duke it out for
are
a spot.
eliminated. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. So, Connor has an interesting question. He's saying, do you guys think ETH will get sacked soon? Does that affect Bruno's confidence?
Hopefully he gets sacked. I don't know. You're the insider here.
I'm not going to trust anything that comes out, because since Ineos took over, the leaks are just rubbish. There is no concrete source for any of the leaks. I feel like
we've had 0 good leaks this season from United.
Absolutely. So I'm not going to trust any of that. One thing I would say is things are definitely being evaluated differently. compared to previous seasons. And just because he was kept for this season does not mean that he has to stay for the whole season, given that Ineos are clearly looking at a style of play and they need something more than just points. Because I feel like it's so weird, but I just felt like Ten Hag's argument with the press about trophies just felt like a classic football Twitter take, where you're comparing trophies for one player with another player. Because I don't think anyone cares about trophies with the way we are playing. And the league position is just getting worse and worse. So I don't think he's out of the question. If anything, I would say compared to last season, he's much closer to being sacked. I can't assign a percentage to it right now, but I think you can have a look at market odds. He is, I think, the manager currently favorite to be sacked, right? If I remember correctly from what I saw 2 weeks ago, he is the favorite right now to be sacked. So I don't think you can play FPL like that.
Yeah,
but I just think Bruno is a good pick anyway.
Sean Dyche are the top two leading favorites.
Yeah.
But the odds aren't that good, I would say.
Yeah.
As in, actually, the odds indicate that actually it's unlikely. Yeah. So
right. Exactly. So that's why I was saying that you can't play FPL based on that anyway. I appreciate the nuance of the question, but I just think Bruno is going to play whatever role this is now. And I just feel like this is just turning into him wasting his peak seasons. Because even last season, what, 8 goals, 12 assists or something like that? I mean, I know the XA indicates he should have gotten much more over the past couple of seasons, but it's just, I don't know. I keep wishing for him to actually get the returns that his underlying stats suggest, but I don't know if they're ever going to materialize. So just don't buy him, I guess. That's the underlying point, because Mo from our group chat knows very well that I would much rather people don't buy him so that no one talks about him.
That's fair. I mean, someone is asking about triple caps. Yeah, I'd if you really want to do it this week, which I feel like you absolutely don't need to, because you always have the option of triple captaining later down the line, and your rank right now isn't going to, your rank this week isn't going to impact your rank in Gameweek 38 as significantly as it might feel, because you're also going to run out of chips eventually. But yeah, with the hot start, you'll probably want to triple captain Haaland if you really want to do it, but I wouldn't quite advise it. And
I know we are supposed to not consider previous results, but the odds of Haaland scoring a third hat trick in a row, I'm going to go out on a limb and say are extremely low.
Yeah, he could score 4. Put it that way.
Okay. Yeah. See, yeah. I left that open, to be honest. Like I didn't say that on purpose, because if he scores 4, I have a way out, right? I could just say,
if he scores 4, we can finally beat the Salah only crowd.
I don't know if you remember this, but when he scored his, I think he scored in his a hat trick in his first appearance for Dortmund.
Yeah.
But the German press or a couple of newspapers argued that it wasn't a hat trick, because technically you have to score 3 goals in a row for it to be a hat trick. So when they reported it, they were talking about how this is not a hat trick, and it's like, yeah, he scored 3 goals.
Okay.
Yeah,
and they didn't consider it a hat trick.
Okay. It's not a hat trick. They kept calling it 3 goals. He scored 3 goals. So
okay. All right. Well, yeah, whatever they do in Germany, fair enough.
Technical cop out.
Zubi says, is starting in Boom over City a no-go? I think it's a no-go. It's priced into the EV, right? Like, yes, of course he has pens all game, but also how likely are you to get a pen versus City? These kind of considerations should be made.
Sorry. Just a question I thought of. So, do you really put any weightage to the fact that we will see less penalties? Not the fact, but the hypothesis that we will see less penalties this season?
Because we've only seen 2 so far in the first 3 game weeks. And with the rule changes. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
How many penalties did we have last season?
I can have a quick look. Just give me a minute.
I guess it's not looking good so far. But then I also feel like it's not like I don't feel like there have been any contentious decisions where I would just say that, like a pen's being gifted or not gifted. So yeah, I feel like 3 game weeks in, we're still definitely on the low side of pens for absolutely no reason. But rule changes aside, I'm sure maybe there will be a slight drop. But yeah.
Yeah, because I just thought I mean, the sample size we have is pretty low, so I don't want to conclude anything based on that. But
Same.
yeah, I just feel like I'm looking for an excuse to say, okay, yeah, this is actually happening. So maybe we want to. So sorry. Coming back to the original point, which I was trying to make is that going to change our strategy of playing anyway? Because the EV is still going to be there for almost all the penalty takers. It's just going to be maybe slightly less than what it would be. So I think that's probably going to lead us to buying the same players. It's not like we are buying players, because this is what happens in Champions League fantasy, right? There are players who we buy because they only take penalties and they do very little on the pitch otherwise.
Yeah.
There have been cases, but that doesn't happen in the Premier League, right? Most of the players we buy have good EV as it is, so I feel like there's even less of a case for that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I just roughly counted the amount of pens.
Yeah,
It's
I have done a horrible job because I tried to do something and it didn't come off, so I'm just going to let it go.
no, it's fine. Like I think we had almost 2.x pens per game week. Last season. So
Okay.
look, we're talking about
Yeah, there's 107 penalties
okay.
in 38 game weeks.
Yeah. So that's roughly pretty close, like 2.8 something.
Yeah, 2.8. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I just don't think we're gonna have such a catastrophic drop off. Like we can't even really compare these ratios right now. So let's discuss this by the next international break, I would say, and then we
Yeah,
can probably revisit. Because yeah, I'm sure it's
absolutely.
significant. The thing is, I've not looked at anything sort of attributing how penalties were earned last season as well, like whether they were like handballs. I don't know if we actually have metrics for that. Do we?
I remember. So I think we have metrics for a player if a player was fouled. So if we remove, like, we can subtract penalties, total penalties. Fouled instances from total penalties, and the remaining instances have to be handball because
Hmm.
there is no other way to earn a penalty, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we could do that, and that would give us a count of how many penalties were actually handball.
Fair.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah, I think we'll find out sooner or later. But even myself, I can't remember that many penalties like coming from like rule changes, if that makes sense. So yeah, we'll find out. And the only thing I would say is yeah, someone like Bruno maybe who might have quite a lot of EV tied to it as a
Yeah. Yeah.
decent attacking team, I'd say. Because generally I've looked
So, but
at.
the thing is, let's say if United keep playing worse and worse, of course it is correlated to them getting penalties, right? And
Yeah,
that will impact his EV even beyond what we think
it's
it
true.
should be right now.
Yeah,
So, like we we were pretty aggravated when Salah's EV shot up and Holland's went down, right, in game week 2, because
yeah,
that's where we actually lost a lot of ground on people who went with only Salah.
correct.
And I feel like in this case, I would not begrudge review if review were to start reducing pen share or something of that sort, or penalty probability, I would say, for United. Just because if you're not getting into the opposition box or area as frequently, then the penalty chances are going to reduce automatically.
Yeah, actually, I remember when Vic shared Simon's expected penalties, and I do believe that they were less than last season, anyways.
Oh, okay.
I wonder
Okay.
if
That's it.
what review has already baked in is generally less than last season. I think last season was a bit of an aberration as well. Like so many top teams had so many penalties, maybe with the exception to Spurs. But yeah, I
Hmm.
think that's all we'll say on the matter. Other sort of points were Mbumo over Porro. Yeah, I mean, I would play Mbumo over Porro, but just about. It's not even. They're both sort of somewhat poor picks this weekend. I'd probably play Lewis over both. And I'd play Ben Bertrand Diaz over everyone, I would say. Or are you doubting that?
No, I'm benching him, but yeah. If you have an attacker who is injured, then please play him.
He's not actually injured though, no?
No. I meant someone else. If you don't have any other attacker available, then play him.
Sorry.
over making a transfer or playing 4 defenders. But right now he's on my bench.
So you've punished all the Southampton players for being Southampton players.
I mean, fortunately, I don't own the best Southampton pick of all time, so I don't have an issue there.
Which is
Adam Armstrong. I just own Ben Bertrand Diaz, who is a poor man's Adam Armstrong.
Yeah, I also have to mark myself safe from picking Adam Armstrong in 24-25.
But the thing is, you can say it with confidence and without any fear of backlash, whereas I can't, because I still own a Southampton attacker, which is bad, and I need to rectify that as soon as possible.
I'll probably have to do that in fan team, but okay, I think that's it in terms of questions for this week, and thank you all for interacting in the chat. Thanks as well for anyone who's been patiently waiting for this episode. This was a bit of a dry week, I have to say. I think a lot of people knew exactly what they wanted to do in terms of decisions, because you're either in the camp where you were forced, like yourself, to make an early transfer because of the pricing, or you are just rolling and waiting for this long game week to end before you can make some moves on game week 5 that could be, Salah oriented or vice versa. So yeah, I think we'll probably heat up with a lot more activity over the next few weeks. Wildcards will definitely be a lot more popular, I would say, generally within the field, and I'm curious to see whether there'll be a lot of price rises in the subsequent weeks because of that sort of pressure from wildcards. Because I can already I'm already starting to see like 6, 7, and 8 heating up as discussion points, whereas I think 5 is just a week where everyone's just going to transfer in Salah, most likely, or if you have Salah, you already have a reasonably good team, and unfortunately it's one of those dull weeks where when 2 teams face off, everyone owns players from both teams, and everyone's losing clean sheets, everyone's expecting their sort of big assets to do very little. So I think Game Week 5 will probably be one of those weeks, but I'm actually looking forward to 6, 7, and 8 for sure.
1-1, Rodri goal, no assist, and Rice goal, no assist. That's the dream.
As long as Arsenal lose a clean sheet, that's fine with me.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So take care, guys. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of the week. I'll see you guys on the weekend for some of my own content as well, and we'll be back next.
Sorry, just one last thing. UCL Fantasy is starting next week, so if anyone wants to check out expected value, it's on my Patreon, and I'm publishing team strength numbers. I've already done that 2 days ago, so you can go on and look out for those. I'll also publish an update on Monday along with captaincies and the rest of it. So if anyone wants to play UCL Fantasy, then it's a different format, 8 game weeks to start the season. It's going to go on until end of January. And then you'll have a wild card for the knockout qualifying phase, and then you'll again get a wild card for the round of 16. So it's going to be a long, drawn-out tournament, and it's going to feel like almost a parallel Premier League competition. It has so many games this season. So hopefully people can enjoy that, and reach out to me if you have any questions about the data.
Yeah, so that's twitter.com/Schadenfreude with a 1. And then, link to the Patreon is there as well. The Patreon is patreon.com/UCL Fantasy, as he mentioned. So have a look at both for a lot of the great work that JD does here, not only on this pod.
Thanks, guys. See you later. Bye.